Those of you that don't know me, I'm Nigel Deacon. I'm a director at Metrostore, joined today by Jan Taranczuk. His list of accomplishments too long for me to remember, so I'll do his own introduction, but I'm sure he's well known to many of you. I was just looking back, and this is actually the 7th webinar we've done on e-mobility over the last couple of years. Actually surprised myself, and we've had some really interesting sessions, some really valuable information. Many of you that haven't seen all those, we'll share at the end a link to our webinar page on our website where you can get recordings and summaries and various bits and pieces available from those. I did just want to say about the very last one that we did though, which was with Electrical Safety First. And I wanted to give a little shout out to Electrical Safety First because they've really raised the profile of lithium battery safety, e-mobility safety with government, and this thing's actually starting to move around the control of the sale of new products, which is a tremendous achievement. I'm very grateful to them, and I'm sure we all are as an industry. Of course, one of the things that this doesn't really address yet is what people do to e-mobility devices after they've been purchased. So let's take a step back for a moment. There's several things we do know. We know that e-mobility is now an important part for many people with their livelihoods, some for independence, and is seen by government as essential for the decarbonisation of our transportation strategy. So it's not going away. That's one thing. Second is, we also know that some of them can represent a significant risk to life, whether it's because of poor manufacture or whether they've been misused, damaged or modified. So as I say, it's those things that people do to a device afterwards, maybe unwittingly, maybe they bought something secondhand which is actually faulty. They don't know that. So things that we perhaps don't know and maybe should know, and this is a moot point, how many of these devices might be stored, charged in residents' flats, what condition they're in, whether they're insured, whether they are presenting a serious risk or whether they're not. So I kept asking myself the question, is this something we're comfortable with? And here's one of the, prime offenders, if you like, the food delivery riders with the extra batteries and gaffer tape and wires hanging out and, an accident waiting to happen. And if we're not, what should we do about it? And this is really why I asked Jan to come along and help us with this discussion. He's got some thoughts to share on this, and I really want to hear what you guys are thinking as well. So Jan, over to you, please.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Nigel. The QR code at the bottom of the screen is my link to LinkedIn. So if you've heard me rant on about fire safety before, you've probably connected with me already on LinkedIn. If you're not, then if you take your camera and scan that, it'll automatically give you a connection link, and I'll happily accept your request later on this morning. The reason I think that's important, because I'm spending an awful lot of time on LinkedIn in sharing information about fire deaths and coroner's reports, and it's linked to something that I'll touch on during the course of this morning. So, Jan Taranczuk, CIHCM, so I'm a corporate member of the Institute of Housing. I'm the only corporate member of the Institute who is also an associate of the Institute of Fire Safety Managers. They accepted me into that august group because I've been banging on about fire safety since Lakenhall House, and I was vice chair of the London CIH board when we organised the first ever fire safety seminar in November 2009, as soon as we could after the Lakenhall fire. And it's since that point that my interest in the subject I have had. I'm not a fire safety expert. The recent article in Inside Housing quoted me as a fire safety expert. I don't consider myself to be a fire safety expert because I just professionally curious. The OHP, by the way, on the back stands for Old Housing Person, because I think that's what I am. I'm also obviously vice chair of the National Social Housing Group, the Fire Strategy Group for South East. And if you could just pop across there, Nigel, for the next slide, it will be really helpful. Because the club is completely voluntary, it's chaired currently by Andy Frankham, who can't be with us this morning. He's just still on holiday. If you'd like to, if you're working for a social landlord, if you could just check on the website, Fire Safety and Housing, and just see whether your organisation is actually a member. And if it's not a member, then sign in. There's no cost, there's no fee. It's just a collection of people interested in fire safety, and they've been heavily involved before I joined in national policy and have had an input into a number of documents that have been produced over the years. So if you're able to join, that would be appreciated, and that will give us a greater voice as the new government looks at how it's going to respond to some of the recommendations out of Grenfell. So the next slide, sir. So we can have the next, that's it. So I'm not going to bang on about what other people have already said. The guidance is already there. People on the call, intelligent people. And if you've not seen all of these bits of guidance, then the links are going to be there for you to see. So the National Fire Chiefs Council issued the Specialised Housing Fire Safety document, 140 pages of it, 7 weeks before Grenfell. And it didn't get as much publicity as it should have done. As a result of that, and following on from all the stuff around mobility scooter fires in the early days, they issued mobility scooter guidance as well, which Andy Frankham and his team were involved in helping to write as well. And there's also currently the specific fire safety guidance on e-bikes and e-scooters. And all of those documents are worthy of a read and are worthy of lifting chunks of it out to link into your own policies or procedures that you're proposing to use within your own organisation. Next slide, please, sir. So what is the fuss about? Well, the London Fire Brigade very kindly gave me their latest figures a couple of days ago. So you can see that since 2022, e-bikes up from 87 a year, 155 last year, 117 already this year. That's to the end of August. Other lithium batteries, there's the figures going up. E-scooters going up. And e-cigarettes, which is the kind of the unknown one that people don't seem to be aware of, that there is also a danger with the battery there as well. The other lithium batteries, I want to just touch on that for the minute. I think if you haven't already issued advice to your residents that essentially says, don't trust your electrical kit. You're forced to leave your fridge and your freezer on all the time, but don't let anything else that's charging charge on its own. Don't charge your computers and your phones overnight, I think would be relevant advice because you just can't trust the little buggers. Next slide. So let's talk about responsibilities. We've got responsibilities as a landlord. Tenants have got responsibilities as well. Your tenancy conditions may well have specific reference to the way people should act within their own homes. And there'll be a link as well to those leaseholders who have rented out their properties to their own tenants as well. I think since the Building Safety Act only applies to tall buildings, I think it's worth reminding everybody that the Act requires a resident not to act in a way that creates a significant risk of a building safety risk. So I would argue that if you've got a bike that is a cheapo bike, or it's been an adapted bike, there is an argument from a landlord's perspective to say, well, actually, you are going to be acting in a way that creates a significant risk. And the other issue then is whether having or charging a bike within your own home, if it's potentially dangerous, could that be classed as antisocial behaviour on the basis that if the thing explodes and the vapour blows out under the door or around the seals of the door and it affects other people in the building, could that be classed as antisocial? Whilst it's not going to be very noisy, it's certainly going to be very deadly. And another guidance note, except please, and apologies for those of you who aren't in the southeast, your own your own local fire and rescue service will have a guidance note, I'm sure, on their own websites, but the London Fire Brigade one is worthy of attention and is again worthy of nicking words out of if you're going to put in information to your residents. Next slide, please. So the insurance thing, it occurred to me, and I'll be interested to hear what people have to say, that it's my view that in fact, I don't think that you can legitimately say to a tenant, you can't have that bike in your flat, because in order to enforce that you can't have it bit, you're going to have to then enforce it through the courts in the end, and the argument will then be whether a judge is going to give you possession on that property or an old court order because of the bike. But it occurred to me that one way of dealing with this would be from the financial aspect. So would it be legitimate to say you need to have insurance for your vehicle? Because remember, if you've got your bike and you've adapted it in any way, the argument would be that you have now become the manufacturer for that bike and you have certain responsibilities as a result. So does your insurance cover you in the event of a fire for both yourself in the building or other residents outside of your home? And then is it legitimate for the landlord to say, you need just to be aware that we're going to come after you for the costs for both damage to the property damage elsewhere. Is that an issue? Is that an issue that other people have already come across? Is it something other people have said? Feel free to join in when we have that discussion later, because I'm just really interested about the way we deal with this particular issue. So that's the residence insurance issue. And then just going on to the next slide, where are we on buildings insurance? Because the world went mad, didn't they? When the minute after Grenfell, buildings insurance has gone, excuse the pun, through the roof. But where have landlord insurers come from on this? Has anybody in the room? And I appreciate that sometimes the insurance stuff is dealt with by the finance team, or if you're in a local authority, by the corporate body as well. But is it worth asking whether there has been a change in the way that landlords insurers are dealing with insurance for buildings because of e-bikes? And it has apparently become an issue for some owners of bike shops. I was reading an article, and I'll refer you to the article in a minute, where in fact owners of bike shops have had trouble getting cover if they disclose to their own insurers that they're actually selling electric bikes, which is just bizarre. And that link at the bottom of the page is to an event, a webinar that was held a couple of days ago by Alliance, which I haven't had a chance to see yet myself, but it's worthy having a poke around at that as well. So next slide, please. And of course, then the issue is a bit like stereotyping of residents, isn't it? Are all electric bikes dangerous? This particular article argues that they're not. And this particular article mentions a particular make, Turn HSD, who have declared publicly that they've had no cases of any of their bikes causing fires. And indeed, if you look at the stuff around e-bikes and e-scooters that are being rented out in cities, none of those apparently have been the cause of a problem. And it would appear that the properly built and properly maintained bikes are not a problem. It's the cheaper end of the market. And the problem for us as landlords is that it's likely that those people seeking to use cheaper bikes are going to be using those bikes as part of their employment, and they're likely to be the ones that are going to be a problem for us as landlords. So I think it's worth just check out that link and check out that article, because I think it's really important. I mean, the other issue about electric bikes is they're not cheap, and that may be an issue as well. So the next slide, please. So where do we go from a landlord perspective, and what are the risks? Well, quite clearly, if you're comfortable with your building's evacuation strategy and it's stay put, then that's one issue. If your current building evacuation strategy is simultaneous evacuation, and in London at the moment there's over 1,000 buildings with that particular strategy, that is, I would argue, slightly more of a risk than otherwise. And what are you doing? I say we. I'm sitting in a room in Maidstone. I haven't got to do anything. What are you doing about checking where the bikes are? Oops, thank you. So what are you doing about checking where the bikes are? And who knows? Well, if you've got caretakers and cleaners working the estates, they're your ears and eyes the whole time. And whilst they won't want to be seen grassing up people, conversations about where those bikes are or the scooters are would be a good start in order to target where they are and to have a policy and a process to advise those residents about what the dangers might or might not be. Obviously, you've got a tenants association within the estate. It's going to be worth hammering that home to them as well. And I think the other point that I would make, that if you're doing anything about information to residents, the stark example of the effect of a bike fire. So if you're able with your local fire and rescue service to have some photographs of fires, the damage that have been caused by fires, is worth having in whatever documentation you produce or whether you put it on your website, just to highlight to people that innocent looking thing with the two wheels and the little bit of electric attached to it can actually be a bit nasty. And of course, the toxic vapor is something that those of us who are not chemists, I'll confess to not fully understand. And when you see what appears to be smoke coming from it, it's clearly not smoke. It's a very dangerous dollop of chemicals that is heading your way. And there are lots of videos about showing where on really large fires where firefighters have been really badly affected by that. And that's also worth having a conversation about, because quite clearly, if you're talking to residents about, look, you've got a bike, you're charging it, where you're charging it, for goodness sake, don't charge it in the hallway next to the front door for obvious reasons. And there was the example, I think, 3 or 4 months ago, where the guy had booked into a London hotel with his electric bike. He plugged it in to charge it whilst he was in the room, and it started making a noise. So he decided he didn't want the bike making a noise in his room, and he put it out in the hallway, where it then exploded. Fortunately, nobody was hurt. But it's that issue about how and what people do within their own homes and how that affects other people in the block is an issue and is of, in my view, concern to us all. So let's have a look at that next slide. What does that say? So this is all about me trying to get people to explain and share what they're already doing. There's no point sitting in your own local authority or social landlord with a towel wrapped around your head trying to work out what to do on your own, because quite clearly some people are doing good stuff. Now, Tina Mystery, who's the building safety manager down in Kensington and Chelsea, who can't join us today, but she's chair of the London group of the social housing group, had said that what they've done is to prevent any charging taking place in communal areas. They've blocked off and locked off any sockets that might exist for communal cleaning purposes, so that they can only be accessed by members of staff. They've also been looking at and have been creating in sheltered blocks with mobility scooters, specific areas within those internally within those blocks that have the correct compartmentation and have 60-minute fire doors on them as well. Tower Hamlets have produced an excellent video, I think. And I don't know whether there's anybody on the call from Tower Hamlets, so they like to, if they are there, to join in and explain what they've done there. And I would suggest that if that could be copied and used by others, that will be really, really good. The other aspect of all of this, and if people are able to join in and share in a minute, Nigel, that'd be fabulous. But the other aspect of this is when you've got your when your building is next being risk assessed by your risk assessor, it really would be a good idea, I would suggest, that given that the whole risk assessment is about the communal area of the building, it would be a good idea to, and I would hope that you've already got within your specification, they do a percentage of fire doors, blah, 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 and also have been aware of the people living within the block who might be more at risk of fire, never mind the electric bike stuff, more at risk of a fire because of the way they live or their circumstances. It will be worthwhile also getting them to identify and have comment about the use of bikes within the blocks as well. Because I think all of this is about maximizing what we know from a safety perspective and then using that to feed back to residents about the concerns that we have about their own safety. So happy to have a conversation about that. And I don't know whether you're ready to do a poll or something at that stage, Nigel, but happy to, if people are happy to put their hands up and join in in a conversation about that, we can do that in a moment. So next slide, if we would. Okay.
Thanks, Jan. I have just put the poll up. If people can have a look at that for a second. And
okay.
But yeah, carry on, Jan.
Okay, fabulous. So people can see the poll, because I can't see it on my screen, but that's fine. The other thing, which goes back to coroner's reports, actually, because those of you who are following me on LinkedIn will know that I've been banging on about coroner stuff ever since the coroner report at Lacanau in 2013. And there were a number of fires being started by faulty fridges or freezers, which then prompted that whole publicity around product recalls and white goods and stuff. And there are websites that people can go to see whether their own product has been recalled because of a safety issue. And if you're not already including that information about product recalls to new tenants as a matter of course, then I would suggest you immediately amend the information you give to new tenants, because if they're moving into properties, you need to ensure that they know which fridges and freezers are already dodgy. And in fact, there have already been e-bikes and battery packs being identified as being dangerous and have been identified as being needing to be recalled. And that's the link for that as well, because there's no point having this information and just keeping it to ourselves. So that's really, and if I just hang on to that minute whilst I'm thinking about it. So just to remind those of you who are young enough not to have read the stuff that came out of Lakanal 11 years ago, colleagues, one of the comments from the judge who was the coroner said that new residents into a block should be given information about how to get out of the block. Now, at the time, because cladding wasn't an issue and an escape from the building wasn't an issue at Lakanal House, despite all the euphoria around it since, it was never an issue at the inquest. Her concern was that people didn't know what to do, and her suggestion was that people should be given that basic information. So at that first tenancy visit that traditionally we do within 6 weeks, I don't know where 6 weeks ever came from, but we do it within 6 weeks, there really should be the opportunity taken, in my view, to take the opportunity to do a person-centred fire risk assessment for everybody within the property, so that residents know how to get out of the property, and you as a landlord become aware of what their issues are in their ability to escape from a fire, both from within the property and whether it occurred outside the property. And that would also then tie in to basic information about electrical products as well. And that can be done by a housing officer. It doesn't need a fire safety expert. The information's there. If you people want to come back to me afterwards and ask for copies of what I've done already, the information is there already. Share your own fire safety knowledge with people that you are housing. Okay, have you got results of the poll?
So far, we've got 20 responses. We've got probably because I said keep talking. Okay. So if anybody else still wants to fill out the poll, that'd be great. So far, we've got 21% that have got an e-mobility policy in place, 24% that allow devices permitted in flats, 14% that have a requirement for testing and insurance, 32% that have provided some safe charging spaces, and that's going up, still ticking up. Yeah. Okay.
Well, then let me kind of finish my blurb. I've been going on for far too long already. That next slide, then, Nigel. For those of you who've been busy doing your day job since the new government's come into place, they've been busy in the House of Lords. So there is a lithium-ion battery safety bill has had its second reading in the House of Lords, and I won't claim to understand the product regulation and metrology bill. So the lithium-ion battery safety bill is a private member's bill, and the one at the top of that screen is the official one being issued by the government. And according to the stuff that I've read, that they're proposing to basically to pull the two together in the committee stages to come up with a document that talks about how the sale of such products is actually regulated. And the briefing paper produced by the House of Lords Library is a good one to read. And if you haven't already got those links, both the House of Lords Library and the House of Commons Library are really good sources of information about anything to do with housing and stuff that's going through through the legislative process. So for the first time, and this is directly a result, as Nigel said, of Electrical Safety First banging on about it from 2020, action has actually been taken. There have been three coroners prevention of future death reports over the last year, where coroners have said, look, this is madness. You have to do something about it. This cannot continue. The most horrendous one, I think, well, there were two horrendous ones. One was the guy who jumped out the window, for goodness sake, in Bristol. And then there's the one of the 2-bedroom flat in Tower Hamlets that it turned out there were, I think, 15 single men living in the 2-bedroom property, and one person died as a result of the e-bike being charged up by the front door. So that's the good news. It's going to take I don't know what, 2 years to get this in place, and in the meantime there are thousands of these bloody things out there on the streets, and we as landlords have to try and keep our residents safe in the way that some of you have started to do already. So I'm up for shutting up and listening to what people are already doing. Happy to answer questions. That's my email address. As always, you'll find my phone number on the internet anyway, but the phone number is there. Always happy to share information. The Fire Safety and Housing website is the one for the fire safety group. If you haven't already joined, join. And I maintain the fact that the only way we can get the number of people dying in fires down is by sharing good practice. The reality is that on average over the last few years, roughly 180 people a year are dying in domestic fires. And that's 15 people a month are dying in domestic fires. Since Lacknall, that's 3,000 people nigh on have died in domestic fires. And since Grenfell, it's about 2,000. So all the stuff about the Pete Upp's book that said, show me the bodies. Well, I can show you 3,000 bodies of people who've died in fires under circumstances that don't relate to necessarily to e-bikes. And now we've got this new danger coming along, which if we're not careful, the number of deaths will go up rather than go down. And I'm just banging on about it because I think we should reduce the number of deaths. Pauses for breath.
Thank you, Anne. That's really helped focus the attention. That's really helpful. So really like to welcome people to ask questions, express views, share experience, knowledge, things that you guys have already put in place, things you're thinking of putting in place. As Jan says, sharing this is key to making the progress we need to make. So put your hand up if you're up for that. Put it in the chat if you want one of us to read it out. But either way, let's hear what you've got to say. It'd be fantastic.
And is there somebody on the call from Poplar Harker? Because I know that Poplar Harker have been doing clever things, and I wondered whether they'd be prepared to join in and share on some of the stuff they've been doing. Because for those of you who don't know, Poplar Harker is the Community Housing Association in East London that has been doing really good things over the years. And we heard from them. Danielle,
we've got Danielle here. Yes,
I'm here.
Yeah,
Sally's here as well.
And Sally's here.
Fantastic. Yep.
Oh, hello, Sally.
Yeah, I saw Sally was in the chat, and I thought I'm not going to steal Sally's thunder because she's the health and safety lady. But I met Jan and Nigel in Liverpool, so yeah.
Well, in which case, Sally, wave the poplar flag and tell people what you're up to down the East End.
Well, what we're very much trying to do, we've put some advice on use of mobility scooters on our website. We don't allow them to be charged in communal areas, and we're trying to find safe spaces that people can charge scooters. We're trying to identify, I suppose, who's got them, and that's quite difficult because we know that we've got lots of them around, and find safe spaces for people to charge them when we know they've got them. But we've also got an outright ban e-bikes, etc., in our communal areas. So we do get quite a few,
before the match started,
few things associated with delivery drivers bringing e-bikes in. Basically, we remove them if they're found. I don't know whether you've got anything else to add.
Like, they were right in the game, but then they just
someone...
there was a lot of silly mistakes that they got.
Somebody needs to turn their mic off.
Yeah, found them.
Okay. I mean, just what Sally said, obviously she mentioned that we're trying to find them, and I think that's where my conversation came with you, Nigel, when we met, through kind of like Sally's initiatives that she mentioned. I'm the head of housing, so I manage our housing teams. So what we're trying to do is establish where especially mobility scooters are. We're very lucky in that we have a safeguarding team, so they have a huge knowledge of like who our most vulnerable residents are, so we can approach them first to find out, do you have mobility scooter, where do you store it? Because also it's the lithium battery side of things, but it's if a mobility scooter's in their hallway and there was a fire, how are they getting out? So there's a whole different idea about it. So we're doing that first, and then our housing officers, as and when they're out on our estate doing tenancy audits, they're making a note of things like that then. And obviously for them, if there are scooters or bikes and they're visible, we can note that down at the same time.
And our estate services teams are very involved in that as well. People even doing property MOTs, it's like everybody's looking out for it.
And I have to say that basic common sense approach is really refreshing, because quite across the piece, there are lots of people in charge of housing teams who for whatever reason haven't got a common sense approach, and you two have clearly got that in place, which I think is you're to be applauded for it, because that whole idea of everybody within the team, whether they're estate services or the tenancy teams, are your ears and eyes about what's going on the estates. And that's one of the joys I think about Poplar Harker, because geographically you're in one place. I know you're in a better position to do it than some people who are all over the place geographically, but mentally and culturally, the issue is that if you're a housing officer or you're an estate services a team, or even if you're a caretaker, the point is that if you see something that doesn't look right, then they're bringing it to your attention. And I think that's the way, that quite frankly is the way forward. And that at some stage you guys need to write that down and share it as an article in Inside Housing, whatever, because I just think there is a story to be told, because what we're not doing enough, and bearing in mind I've been around for far too long, what we're not doing enough is sharing information, because sharing is caring. And I know some people go, oh, we're not going to tell anybody else because we're really clever. But if you're really clever, tell people that you're really clever. And you two are just doing what I think is the right thing, and you need to be shouting it from the rooftops.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I'd echo that. You're definitely going above and beyond, what some would say is the minimum requirement. And I think it's probably worth reminding everyone that a lithium-ion battery fire is not like an ordinary fire. It starts out much more quickly, it's much more severe, it continues for longer. A lot of the assumptions, or the theory that we may have based our processes or procedures on up till now may not be sufficient for that. There's also the fact that the toxic gas, as we said earlier, you could have an incident where it's a thermal runaway event, there's not actually ignition, so there's no heat, there's no, your fire doors, the intumescent seal's not closing up, but you've got this toxic vapor cloud which could be spreading around the building. So I think it's certainly an approach that is definitely to be applauded. I think that's brilliant.
And just to come
Thank
back,
you for what you shared. Sorry.
Absolutely. Just to come back to peer review, because it's not this isn't, I think this may predate the peer review, but in fact I happen to know, because I lived in Tamlets for nearly 30 years, and I know Steve Stride extremely well. I happen to know that Poplar Harker was one of the first landlords to move away from rubbish chutes and have a waste disposal in areas away from the block, again to reduce reduce fire. And Tamlets Council was the first council, I think, in the country who was forced to buy a waste disposal van that was capable of lifting the bins up from the ground, because you've got underground disposal. And that, at the time, this was many years ago, was deemed as a bit daft, because residents aren't going to take their rubbish out to the bins. And I think that has proved not to be the case. So innovation is worth sharing about and telling people how you've done it, because I think it's really important. Nigel, I keep seeing things popping up on my screen, but I can't see anything else as to what people have said. So is anybody else wanting to come in and join us? So Daniel and Sally, thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, there are a few questions on the chat. I'm just going to bring in Steve Dillaway next. Been keeping him warm for about the last 5 minutes. Steve,
Okay.
do you want to come in there? You still there, Steve?
Steve,
Perhaps we'll keep him warm for a bit longer.
Probably just been trying to find them.
Yeah, sorry. So Ed here. So I mean, Steve's written down in the chat. There's a few. I might just quickly go from the top. There's a quick question of how this is Thomas Ronan, and it's a quick question of the other lithium battery fires. How many of those are cars?
That's a very good. Okay. Well, I know, in fact, of that set of stuff. Hi, Steve. I can see your face.
Hi.
Let me just answer that the point that Edward made. As far as I'm aware, none of those are cars, actually. They're all just ordinary individual battery fires. What I will do is I will ask London Fire Brigade for that information next time I speak to them, and I'll make sure that we're able to share that information. Because I think the electric car thing is an issue, both specifically for people who've got underground garages. But I'm certain that none of those fires in that table I provided are for cars. But I'll get that confirmed. Thanks for asking. Hi, Steve.
Thank you.
Hi. Yes. Good afternoon, or good morning, everybody. As a BAIF certified fire risk assessor, I'm seeing more and more sites where portable equipment or portable transport or mainstream vehicular transport is becoming a greater part of the conversation. And I've actually made an approach to BAIF to talk to Nigel with a view to doing an introductory conversation to other BAIF certified risk assessors to bring that information to a wider audience. It's still it's seen as a dark art almost, yeah. And if you've not jumped in and tried to understand what goes on, and I've been speaking to Nigel and others for the last 2 years to try and make my risk assessment information more palatable to those that it's being delivered to give them an understanding of where they have risk that they've never seen it before, whether it's private residential accommodation or outside of that. And it's still a major problem. There was a comment made earlier about insurance. Now, Allianz, who your reference was made to, if you mention lithium battery issues to them now, they will buy running shoes and leg it. All right, they're not interested in any buildings, commercial or residential, where there is a lithium provision. I've got issues of that already, where clients are being given 30 days notice to find an alternative provider once the lithium conversation is on the table. Now, part of that is ignorance on their part. They need more education in understanding that not all of these products are a hand grenade. The better produced product
are safe.
Is okay, and you really will only get issues, and Nigel will back me on this, once the battery then needs to be replaced if it's outside of a UCAS or a CE marking and it's built on the other side of the world in a garage for not a lot of money. But the insurance industry, and to a certain extent the emergency services, can't differentiate between the two. When you to take a slightly wider view, and I won't speak all afternoon, but London Ambulance Service by 2026 will have a completely electric fleet in London, and I've already done some guidance support with them in terms of that. Looks great on paper, but delivering that is quite a challenge. If you can imagine a Ford Mustang emergency response vehicle driving flat out over speed bumps in southwest London, is going to fracture the floor and cause a significant problem for the vehicle, and that's without lithium powered equipment they may have in the back of a mainstream ambulance. There's issues from an assessment point of view in terms of who you let on the site. What is your RAMS procedure for contractors using and charging up tools on site when they're doing repairs? I tend to prohibit that. I tend to request management or prohibition of the charging of bikes and scooters in common areas as a matter of common sense, but also in respect of commercial buildings. So if you've got retail underneath apartments where people go to work on scooters and bikes, I prohibited their use and storage inside the structure for all the reasons we've spoken about in the last 40 minutes. And what I'm trying, yes, go on, Jen.
Sorry, Steve. I think the point you're making, and thank you for making it, I think is that the what we should be doing as landlords is making sure that our fire risk assessors understand what fire risk assessment should be about, and not what it has previously been about in previous years. And my advice to housing management colleagues in the room is that when you're procuring fire risk assessors, you're not going for the cheapest one for the 30 bob job to do a block. You need somebody like Steve and others, because there are others like you, Steve, who understand that the fire risk assessment is that, and it's for the building and its occupants, and needs to be delivered a way that the landlord is able to deal with the information you provide. And I think that's really important. It's a very mixed bag here, because not everybody wants to hear it.
If you're talking to somebody about prohibiting electric scooters or bikes in an environment where that person you're talking to has come to work on one, then you have a complicated conversation, because you're asking them to get the bus rather than do that. But in general terms, certainly within the UCAS certified environment, there is an appetite for people to learn more, which is the reason I've put Ken Bullock from BAIF in touch with Nigel to try and arrange something formally for people like me within that. But there is still an enormous level of ignorance, whether it's waste disposal, whether it's people coming onto site. I've modified slightly the wordings that I give to people now. If visitors come to site in an electric vehicle, as to where that vehicle is parked in terms of its proximity to other parts of that site, in case there's a thermal runaway issue while it's there. It doesn't have to have an impact. It can have an issue that can either then prevent the emergency services getting in or the other people getting out. And it needs to be a much wider platform conversation from the risk assessor's perspective, in terms of, I'm going to tell you things you don't want to hear, and I'm going to give you information you really don't want to deal with, but you have to.
Indeed, and I need you to take a breath at that point, because I suspect there are other people trying to get in, and that's been really helpful, Steve. I'm grateful to you. If we're not already connected, I hope we're going to connect on LinkedIn shortly. Thank you for your contribution. What else we got, Edward?
Well, if no one else has got anything to say immediately, it's the next one. There's a question about personal. Is that one? Oh yeah, this is a little bit. Sorry, I didn't get on this sooner because it was whilst you were talking. But it's we already undertake. This might be for everyone else on the call to chip in if they've got any advice. We already undertake PEEP, so personal effective escape plan, I think that is, in our core sheltered housing schemes, but how do you ensure your PEEP is kept up to date in general purpose housing when you're not kept up to date with a person's change in health and disability? So
I think that's a really good question. I think there are two things. The PEEP should be the end result of the person-centered fire risk assessment. Number one, it can't be done on its own. And number two, its up-to-dateness is the same for a sheltered block as it is for a general purposes block. And I would argue, therefore, that if you've gone to the trouble of creating or identifying people who are vulnerable in some shape or form, that information is going to be kept up to date on a regular basis. Now, regular being 3 monthly, 6 monthly, or whatever, but that information has to be a contract between the landlord and the tenant themselves. So the tenant and I appreciate that in some cases they're not going to be capable of this, in which case it's the landlord's job, but that information has to be kept up to date in a way that is pertinent to the fire and rescue service. Now, whether if that information is going to be kept in the girder box, I'll use the term girder box because they're nearly all girder boxes downstairs, then also two things need to happen. The tenant needs to give permission that the information is kept in the girder box, number one. And number two, there has to be a process of keeping it up to date. You can't just, fire safety isn't a straight line. It's a bit like continuous improvement. It's a circle. Once you've done it, you have to go around and do it again. And that really is the key issue. So having created the personal plans for individuals, that has to be kept up to date, and there has to be a process in place to demonstrate that you know how to keep it up to date. Otherwise, the danger is fire occurs in the block, brigade turns up, opens the box, sees that number 13 has got a problem, and they rush up to number 13 to sort out who's ever in number 13, and the tenant has changed or the tenant is dead or whatever. And that's really, really important. So if that helps, again, I'm happy to have a conversation with somebody offline if that is any good to anybody. And of course, David, I've just seen the pop up. The other point, of course, is somebody may be temporarily injured in such a way. Now, how that's kept up to date, we'll have to see what the guidance comes out of the Home Office in the autumn about that, because that is my view is a major issue and comes back to how you deal with the fire either occurring in the property or outside of the property.
Well, it just goes to show that people are at very different stages of the journey here. So just one more message here that's from Sue Wright. So, and she's only got one side charging pod at the moment out of 12 independent living schemes. And she is concerned that she's seeing loads more residents purchasing mobility scooters and charging them inside their own flats. Now, she says any advice would be very welcome, please. Obviously, that's a huge subject, but this will be an example where she'll need to link up with everybody.
Absolutely. Well, the guidance that we've shared with the links, Sue, that's going to be your nighttime reading in any event. But just go back to what Kensington and Chelsea have already done, and I did it when I was at Lewis, and that was finding a space within the sheltered block and converting it into a safe compartment in which charging can take place. That's in my view the easiest. The other way, of course, and it's appropriate to discuss it since we're on a Metro stored call, is to see whether you've got space outside the building in order to create an external store for them as well. More difficult for mobility scooters, I realise, because quite clearly people have mobility scooters because they can't walk very far. But it's a combination of identifying space either inside or outside the building. Again, happy to share or discuss with that, but hopefully the guidance that we've shared is going to be of some use to you. So, but you've got my number. Give us a ring.
Yeah, I'm glad that's come up actually, because the guidance did mention lithium-ion batteries, but they probably weren't as much of a thing then as they are now. And some of the guidance around keeping the mobility scooter in the flat as long as it's not blocking the escape route, as long as you can get it sort of behind a fire door and that sort of thing. I think it's really important that we're aware of the additional risk, if you will, that the lithium-ion battery presents. So part of that more detailed PEEP and the detailed the fire risk assessment could be, is that unit actually fitted with a lithium-ion battery? Is it original? Because if it's a lead acid battery, then the risk is lower. There is still a risk. That's why the guidance was put in place, but it's lower. And I think the importance of doing that detailed assessment is becoming even more crucial with the prevalence of lithium-ion batteries. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And all of this is about us keeping up to date and then making sure we're trying to keep our residents up to date. All of that, of course, is in the midst of doing our day jobs at the same time, bearing in mind we only have 9 days a week in order to do our 5-day week job. Understood.
But be good to hear from anybody else that's got plans in place for mobility scooters.
Okay, I can see the tumbleweed blowing across the screen. That's fine.
I can.
Maribel, also, Karen.
Yeah, I was just going to come in on that if I can on mobility scooters. I think, it's important to remember that, and I've just put a reply back to Sue's comment earlier. Yeah, a mobility scooter is not a piece of medical equipment. It's not a prescribed piece of equipment. So you can put rules in place within your building policies to say, actually, before you purchase a mobility scooter, you must check with us that it's suitable to have that in place and that there is suitable storage available. That's something that we work very strongly with residents to make sure that, if a customer is buying, a new mobility scooter or, and even retrospectively, we're asking our customers to register them with us so that we can make sure that they are being stored in the appropriate area and that they're being, that they're being stored safely.
Absolutely. On my screen, I can't see who we are.
Live West, Dave Johnson.
Hello, so Dave, I saw your name, but I didn't know where you're from. Live West, fine, that's fine. And also, I'm also happy to share a local authority mobility scooter policy that I wrote in 2015. How scary is that? Happy to share it. I've got it. I can blow the dust off it and whack it down to people if they wanted to see a copy. All you've got to do is make sure it's up to date and change the top, and you've got a policy. Off you go.
Oh, I think loads of people will love that.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what I might do. I might just put it up as a link on LinkedIn or something. But I'll have to delve into my folders. But I shall find it. It's a job for me to do. Okay. And anything? Yes. Hello, Lee. Thank you. Oh God, what have I done? Okay, I'll need to go and find it. No problem. All right. I'll tell you what we'll do then. If I find it and I give it to Nigel, then he can add it to all the people who are on the list as oh my goodness me. Goodness me.
Yeah, we can make sure that gets forwarded on.
Okay. I shall find it for you. No problem. Happy to share. Okay. Anything else? Are we going till 12 or 12:30?
We've booked to 12:30 if we can keep talking that long.
Listen, my friend, don't tempt me, but people have got lives. People have got lives to lead. Any other important questions that people are anxious to get answers to before they disappear off to get their sarnie? Hello, Sharon. I can see this popping up. Anybody else?
Yeah, feel free to stick your hand up, ask a question. Got any more to pick out from there, Ed?
Hang on.
I'm hanging.
There was one thing that Peter, I started saying this, didn't I? Peter Maribel said lithium-ion battery disposal is also becoming a potential issue that may need to be looked into.
Yeah, well, Harker have sorted that by having bins that are several yards away from the building. So that is an issue, and I think from a social landlord perspective, liaison with your local authority is the way to deal with it. I off the top of my head, I don't know the answer. I really don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, can I jump in there?
Yeah, of course you can. Hello.
I did some risk assessment work on some properties, private landlord rather than other, where I had to educate the residents on what not to do with disposables. And in association with Mark Preston at Southwark, we put together a program whereby Southwark were allowed the blocks to purchase a fire rated disposal bag for lithium batteries that was collected weekly when the bins were collected, and the bag was then returned for further use to stop people putting it into a blue bin that potentially would then cause an issue. Okay. And the problem for me was that the bins at the time were inside the building.
Okay, I mean that's fine, except that of course most supermarkets now have got battery disposal boxes that people can take their own small batteries in. But obviously it's a bigger issue. I see Sally's got a hand up, Nigel.
Oh, where's Sally?
Yeah, just to say that we had a few problems on our estates where batteries were put into regular waste bins and then set light. and even the back of the Tower Hamlets bin wagon set light at one point because a battery ignited. And what we found out was that it's something they call battery building, where people have got e-bikes and so on, and they soup them up by adding more and more batteries. So we ended up putting a camera up to try to identify who was doing this, but didn't manage to. But this is a sort of problem generally, that people try to, battery build effectively. And then these things are really, really unsafe.
Okay, well, thanks for sharing that positive piece of news, Sally. Thank you very much. But useful, thank you.
Yeah, we can provide battery boxes to go outside of the blocks, because they're clearly marked. They can serve to sort of educate people and raise awareness that, hey, the batteries do need to be separated, as well as providing a convenient place for people to deposit them, because it's not just what happens on your premises, but like Sally says, there's fires pretty much every day across the country, in vehicles, at MRFs, in waste disposal facilities, because it's when they get crushed, impacted, something like that as part of the disposal process, that some quite serious fires are happening. So it is important.
Okay, anybody else or any other questions that have come up that we haven't properly answered, that I'm happy to deal with. As I said, my email address, you've seen my email address. If you haven't already linked in with me, then I'm the only Jan Taranczuk on LinkedIn. There's a couple of other Taranchuks. They're all related to me in some shape or form, although the ones in Poland, we can't quite work out what our connection is, but there is a connection somewhere. And feel free to message me either on LinkedIn or at jan.taranczuk@googlemail.com. Happy to join in at whatever point you wish. I'll now shut up and watch the screen.
Thank you, Alice. That's really, really appreciated. I was just going to round off with a couple of points. One is that we have got a section on our website where we're collecting up all sorts of posters, videos, resources and things which you're welcome to use as part of your campaigns, raising awareness with residents, and would welcome an opportunity to share actual policies and that sort of thing, templates and things, if any organisations are willing to share them, make them available to others. And lastly, if you decide that you do want to make some charging provision externally secure, then we also have a range of charging lockers for mobility scooters, e-bikes, e-scooters as required. So we would, of course, be very happy to talk to you about those at any point. So massively appreciate everybody that's joined today.
Absolutely.
And to Jan for his time and knowledge, which he's kindly donated. We will share slides, we will share recordings. Sometimes takes a week or so before that appears on our website, but you will be sent a link when it goes live. Yeah, please connect and share as much as you can. Thank you.